this segment, homework 4, is about the slope. The slope between two lines. We looked at the graph and have the idea of the slope being positive and negative, 0 or undefined. But in this one we want to have the coordinates of 2 points and use those coordinates to figure out the slope. You could always graph the 2 points on a coordinate system and count the rise and the run, or the fall and the run, and figure out the slope, but we want to do it with a formula. The formula that we use supposes that we have 2 points to begin with. All points are x comma y. Well, since we have 2 of them, we want to distinguish between the 2. So we're going to call this one point 1, and therefore its coordinate members are x sub 1 and y sub 1. And the second point we'll call its coordinate members x sub 2 and y sub 2. The formula for the slope is then y sub 2 minus y sub 1, the rise, remember the y's go up and down, over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Remember the x's go across, so that's the difference, or how far they go across. So that's the formula. Let's actually work it out in an example. Let's find the slope of the line through the 2 points, -2, 5, and 3, 6. Well, I'm going to start out by labeling these points, and when you get a little better at this, maybe you won't find that as helpful. But I'm going to label the first one x sub 1, y sub 1, and the second one x sub 2, y sub 2. And the slope is y sub 2 minus y sub 1 for x sub 2 minus x sub 1. So what am I going to put here in place of the y sub 2? Y sub 2 is 6. What am I going to put instead of the y sub 1? 5. Notice this negative didn't get touched. The same thing's going to happen to the negative down here. It's not going to get touched. So when I go down here, x sub 2 is 3, and x sub 1 is -2. So I have 2 negatives there. So now I have 6 minus 5, which is 1, and 3 minus a -2. Remember, 2 negatives together are going to turn into a plus. So I'm going to have 3 plus 2, or 5. So the slope of the line through these 2 points is 1/5. Let's do another example. Find the slope of the line through the points -6, 9, and -4, -10. The negatives are really, the slope equals. The negatives are really the hardest part of this. So the slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I'm going to have to remember to write these negatives. Okay, so y2 is, let's label them. This one's x sub 1, y sub 1. Let's make that a little neater. Y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2. Remember, the first one's always an x, and the second one's always a y. So y sub 2 is -10. Don't forget the minus. And y sub 1 is 9. x sub 2 is negative 4, and don't forget the minus, and x sub 1 is negative 6, so I'm having those two negatives together. At the top I have negative 19, and the bottom, these two negatives turn into a plus, so I have negative 4 plus 6, which is 2. So my slope is negative 19, 6. Okay. Let's try this one. Find slope through, I'm going to do a little shorthand there, through 5, comma, negative 6, and 5, 3. So when I label these, this one's x1, y1, this one's x2, y2, and I'm going to write the slope formula every time until I have it memorized, and then I may still write it occasionally, but I need to write it at least every time. That'll help me memorize it till it's in my brain. Okay, y2 is 3 minus, now I'm going to look at y1. y1 is negative 6. Right? x2 is 5, x1 is 5. Remember, two negatives together become a plus, so 3 plus 6 is 9. 5, oh, 0. What's 9 divided by 0? Remember, you cannot divide by 0, so it's an undefined slope. If I was to plot these 2 points and graph them, connect them with a line, it would be a vertical line. Remember how the vertical line was like a cliff. Couldn't ski down it. Die. It's a slope that is undefined. You cannot have 0 in the denominator. What about 0 in the numerator? Well, you can have 0 in a numerator, just not in a denominator. So let's find the slope through 3, negative 2, and negative 4, negative 2. This one, we have x1, y1, x2, y2, and the slope will be y2, which is negative 2, minus y1, which is negative 2, x2, which is negative 4, minus x1, which is 3. Again, I get those two negatives together, making a plus. So negative 2 plus 2 is 0, and negative 4 minus 3 is 7. That's perfectly fine. That's 0. And if I were to graph these 2 points, I would get the horizontal line, the 0 slope line. That's how you find the slope using the coordinate points.